In a small, forgotten town nestled deep in the woods, there was an old barber shop that had stood for generations. Its windows were grimy, and the faded sign above the door simply read, Henry's Cuts. Henry, the barber, was an elderly man with hands that moved with eerie precision, as if he had been cutting hair for centuries. No one could recall when he had first opened the shop, but everyone in town had, at one time or another, sat in his chair. What people didn't talk about, however, was the curse. There was a rule that had been passed down in whispers among the locals. Never visit Henry's after dark. No one knew exactly why, but the few who did venture there late at night either disappeared or left town without a word. Over time, people learned to avoid the shop when the sun set. One stormy night, a young traveler named Jack found himself stranded in town. His car had broken down, and with no way to leave, he decided to stay at the local inn. He noticed his reflection in the window. His hair had grown unruly from weeks on the road. As he wandered the deserted streets, he spotted Henry's Cuts, the only building with a dim light still flickering inside. Ignoring the whispered warnings from the innkeeper, Jack decided a quick haircut wouldn't hurt. After all, what was the harm in seeing a barber at night? Pushing open the heavy door, Jack was greeted by the sharp scent of aftershave and old leather. The shop was quiet except for the faint sound of snipping scissors coming from the back room. From behind a thick velvet curtain, Henry emerged. He smiled, but his eyes were cold, almost too wide, as if they hadn't blinked in years. "Late for a cut, aren't you?" Henry said in a raspy voice, motioning to the chair. Jack shrugged and sat down, trying to ignore the unsettling atmosphere. The old barber draped a weathered cape over Jack's shoulders and began to work. His scissors moved with a speed and grace that Jack hadn't expected from someone so old. The snipping sound filled the room, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. As Jack watched the reflection in the mirror, he noticed something strange. Henry wasn't casting a reflection. Jack blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the dim light. But as the haircut continued, the realization gnawed at him. Henry leaned in close, his breath cold against Jack's neck. "You have beautiful hair," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. Jack's heart raced. He wanted to get up, to leave, but his body felt frozen in place. The room seemed darker, the shadows creeping closer. Henry's scissors glinted in the low light, moving faster, almost aggressively now. Jack glanced down at the floor. It wasn't just hair that was falling. Strands of skin, like thin shavings, were drifting to the ground. Panicking, Jack tried to pull away, but the barber's hands were strong, unnaturally strong. "Almost done," Henry murmured, his voice now more sinister, his smile widening unnervingly. Jack's scalp began to burn. It wasn't just his hair being cut. It felt like his very flesh was being sheared away. He screamed, but no sound came out. The reflection in the mirror began to distort. His face sagged, pale and bloodless, while Henry stood behind him, grinning wider and wider, his eyes gleaming with dark delight. With a final snip, Henry stepped back, admiring his work. Jack's body slumped forward, lifeless, his hair perfect, but his skin stretched tight, hollow like a doll's. Henry turned to the mirror, his reflection finally appearing. But it wasn't Henry. It was Jack. With a satisfied chuckle, the barber hung his scissors on the wall, brushing off the stray strands of skin and hair. Then, as if nothing had happened, he opened the door and waited for the next customer. The next morning, the townspeople found the shop locked, just as it always was after dark. No one knew what had happened to Jack. They would only tell the same warning to travelers passing through. Never visit Henry's after dark.